The concerns about the skin colour of the couple's child was really the bombshell revelation. What sort of reaction has there been there in the UK?
Well, it's only recently played out here in the UK, so the public, and it's in lockdown, of course, so not getting a great sense from the public, but I think the viewing figures would have been very high because of lockdown. We're starting to see the front page of the newspapers come out here in the UK, and they're utterly focused on palace crises, palace turmoil. Why hasn't there been a response yet? You can understand how this is a very sensitive issue to respond to. Effectively, the palace being accused of institutional racism by the one person probably qualified to speak to the issue, which is the one diverse figure, senior royal, who was in the palace and realised that she couldn't cope with it anymore, and she feels it is a racist institution. That's effectively what she was saying in that interview with Oprah Winfrey. It is a bombshell allegation. The palace will have to think very carefully about its response, and there will be a response, I'm sure. The other allegation, of course, is that she wasn't given any support about severe mental health issues, which effectively was her talking about being on the verge of suicide. So those are the two key issues that the palace is expected to respond to, but hasn't done yet.
And when it comes to that sort of response and what we're expecting, what are royal watchers thinking as to how they'll even go about that? I mean, is there any precedent here as to how they might choose to respond to those allegations, or whether or not they won't dignify the allegations with a response?
It's difficult to know what kind of response, because they haven't been giving much comment about the Oprah show. I think that they weren't planning to respond. They were going to allow Meghan and Harry to have their say. They're finally allowed to speak freely, of course, but they weren't expecting these massive allegations. I was speaking to people the night before the show went out in the US, speaking to people in the palace. They hadn't seen it. No one had been given a preview. I think everyone was shocked by the level of accusation coming from the Sussexes. So there are various households that work together in the royal fold, as it were. They'll be sitting around a table, I'm sure, trying to come up with a unified response, because these allegations from the Sussex side were so personal. I'm sure emotions are running very high. Ultimately, because it's such a high-level statement that will have to come out, it's about former senior members of the royal family. The Queen will have to sign off on it. Is she holding off? Does she need a night to consider it? She's got a lot on her plate. Prince Philip's in hospital, and maybe that's the reason. I don't think it's now a case of they're not going to respond. It's just what kind of response we're going to get and when we're going to get it.
The monarchy is no stranger to scandal, as we know. One of the front pages we just showed our viewers was saying it's the worst royal crisis in 85 years. What is the sense there as to how the monarchy is travelling in Britain these days? Does it enjoy widespread support? What are the popularity levels like? Are younger generations in particular questioning the monarchy's usefulness more broadly?
There is widespread support for the monarchy. It's been compared, however, to, I think, more Diana and the Panorama interview and the Diana crisis, if I can call it that, around the mid-1990s after she died, and the lack of response to, a lot of the grieving that followed that. That was a crisis for the monarchy. It took them years to respond, or to recover from, really. This is comparable. I think a lot of the allegations Meghan was describing, she said that Harry saved her life. It's that level of sort of concern and allegation, and it could cause a crisis for the monarchy if they don't respond correctly. I think it's actually a harder thing to respond to because the questions are harder to respond to. How do you argue with someone whose personal experience it was to face this racism is what she felt? You can't really argue about that. You can respond, but it has to be a highly sensitive response. There are other parts of the interview which you could pull the Sussexes up on. I'm sure there are some things that the palace can challenge them on, but would that seem petty when you've got a much bigger allegation lingering there, which is the priority really, and this idea that she didn't have a duty of care. She felt suicidal. She went to ask for help from the Human Resources Department, from a top courtier, we're told, and she didn't get any help from them. That's also a massive allegation when mental health is an issue which the royal family have championed famously in recent years, particularly that generation of royals, you know, the Sussexes and the Cambridges. There's a level of hypocrisy here as well. All of these things the palace has to respond to at some point. Maybe they are allowing the Sussexes to have their voice on this day, but tomorrow there's a huge amount of pressure in the British newspapers for them to say something.
There have been critics very keen to pick holes in the story that Harry and Meghan told Oprah. For example, when they were talking about how they actually got married a few days prior to the royal wedding that we all saw. Is there any clarification on that front? Are there other aspects that you think are going to be in the firing line in terms of picking holes in the story?
There's the element of the titles. Was Archie automatically entitled to be a prince or a princess? Does that link with security details? I think that there's a level of debate there. Obviously, Prince George is a prince, but he was made an exception. It's normally just grandchildren of the monarch that are made princes. Again, I think these are picking holes rather than addressing the bigger issue. The Duchess also talks about how she wasn't given any support and taught the protocols of royal life, for example. I think they can challenge that as well, because I've certainly heard that she was offered levels of support. But again, it seems a bit petty when you consider the level of the other allegations. When it comes to the wedding, I mean, yeah, there was a sort of high-level royal commentator here in the UK that said she felt quite conned by the wedding when it was here at Windsor Castle, because now she learns that he didn't actually get married in that moment, that sort of poignant moment here at St George's Chapel. They were actually married 3 days before. I mean, there's so much to unpack. There were revelation after revelation in this documentary, and there's more. You know, they recorded something like 3 hours worth, and only 2 hours worth went out. We've had some extra excerpts today from CBS. I'm sure there'll be more. It's just going to keep giving this. But this, you know, when you speak to the Sussex side, when I spoke to the Sussex side ahead of the interview coming out, they really did see this as their first opportunity to speak very freely about their experience. They did feel silenced for years. So they got it all out with Oprah, and I think Oprah did a pretty good job of doing that as well. They felt comfortable, and, you know, it did feel like a once and for all interview, I think.
Max Foster, CNN correspondent, live there from Windsor. Appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much.